Hey folks, it's Derek from ForeGolf Custom. Today we're looking at the Mizuno iron, their brand new JPX 923 range. We have the Hot Metal Pro, the Hot Metal, and the Hot Metal HL. There's some really interesting insights into the loft settings on this club that you might want to take note of. It's very important to understand the lofts to get the best from this club, but also Dave has some really strong insights into the shaft for this iron and the different heads, and trust me, it's not what you think. If you're new to the channel, please subscribe, give us a like, let us know what you think about this video if it's helping you make decisions. And we're gonna go straight into the Hot Metal Pro, Dave. Tell me, where is this fitting into the fitting matrix?
It sits in there at that new players distance category, TaylorMade P790, Cobra X Forge, Titleist T200, that sort of product. So that it's not very offset head, slightly smaller, thin top line. So very much visual orientated, but packing a bit of tech into it for speed and for power.
Is there good feel in this? Can you sense the feel in this club?
Mizuno build their business around something feeling good, so nothing feels like a Mizuno. So for the way that the tech's there, it fits in real well. It's real, not to use the word buttery because it's a bit more crisp these days, a bit more solid off the face, but there's certainly that softness and that understanding of what's going on with the ball off the face.
And then similarly, Hot Metal, then that iron head, where is that slotting into your fitting matrix?
You're a typical higher handicappers golf club, slightly bigger head profile, a little bit more offset if you cut it, a little bit wider in the sole, helps get the ball in the air, a little bit longer in the blade length, just to help increase the sweet spot, for want of a word, to make sure that off-center hit stays straighter. And
that chromalloy nickel that they've brought in, are you seeing that faster, or is that a fairly similar tech over last season?
They've thinned the face out, so there's 8% of a thinner face that as a result of making the metal stronger. So yes, I'm seeing ball speed gains over the 921, which would have been the previous model of this. So there's certainly speed changes. So that's kind of all adding to the ability to the ball going further, which is, I guess, the industry trend of getting the ball to go further for doing less.
And then similar to Hot Metal HL, I admit when we first got the review of this from our ACISM, David Moore, he brought us all the heads to have a look at it about a month ago or so. And I was surprised to pull out that HL. Where's HL fitting in then in this kind of Mizuno matrix?
It's just the next iteration again. It's bigger in head size, it's more offset again. So you've got smallest and neatest in the Pro, less offset as you go down towards the HL, bigger head, lower center of CG, helps get the ball up in the air, and primarily it has a different loft setting to the other two. So the HL high launch, easy to get the ball up in the air for a number of reasons, of which one of them, which we will discuss, will be loft. Right, let's skip right into it. Why wait?
So lofts on this, Dave, we got the spec sheet sent through. Let's start with Hot Metal Pro, and let's obviously bring everybody that's watching into this about the importance now of identifying the lofts on these and what it might do to your set makeup. So let's talk about the loft settings on that Hot Metal Pro first. So it's probably only been a couple of years where we've been discussing taking your traditional gap wedge, sand wedge, lob wedge combination at 52, 56, 60 and bringing it into 54, 50 and 58. But now we're in a realm where pitching wedges are 42.5 degrees, which you'll get in the Pro and the standard Hot Metal, which is, in old money's terms, 2 clubs stronger than whatever it used to be. Right, so there's a lot of numbers going on out there, so maybe you get a look on the website and you'll see the loss for yourself, but technically what Dave is saying essentially is the pitching wedge is now 42.5, where, I don't know,
10 years ago it might have been 46 to 48, yeah.
48, let's say. So the strength in the pitching wedge has gone forward. Now, there is a reason behind this, and a lot of it's to do with the fact that these launch quite high.
Yeah.
So they've had to strengthen the lofts a little bit to counterbalance, otherwise you'd have this really high flight with really high spin, which means everything would be high and flighted.
Yeah.
However, you said something really interesting when we were doing the prep on this, was that you think that the 4 to pitching wedge set is gone.
4 to pitching wedge, as we traditionally would have known it, the 4's been scribbled out and we're now at the stage where 5's comfortably written on it. So 4 to pitching wedge hasn't disappeared, it's just been renamed. So 4 to pitching wedge is now called 5 to gap wedge. And pretty much every set that will be produced from here now on will need a gap wedge as part of the iron set. It probably then becomes the most important club in each manufacturer's setup, not just Mizuno, but everybody. Because if we're going to keep continuing to make pitching wedges stronger and stronger, and if we don't, we can bring sand wedges and lob wedges further in loft, but it's easy just to gap it by sticking a gap wedge in, which in theory for most people is the club where you would have hit your pitching wedge in your current set, you now hit the thing called a gap wedge or an A wedge or whatever description they want to make it.
It's really interesting because that's a big educational program here with us from doing the fittings, and I see it at the counter when we bring the people outside to talk through, you know, what Dave is recommending from the fittings is gap wedge or GW or A wedge or approach wedge, whichever of the different brands, has become the new club that people have never seen before, never seen it mentioned, and never seen it as part of the sets. And Dave, you tend to like to bring the technology of that gap wedge into a lot of the sets that I see you putting out there to try and keep so really what we're talking about here, folks, is keeping your distance regulated when you get down to the short iron club. So when you get down to 9 iron, pitching wedge, gap wedge that Dave is talking about, sand wedge, lob wedge, there needs to be a certain uniformity here. Okay, so don't just go plugging in a sand wedge, going 4 to pitch and thinking, that's me, I'm done. You're going to have massive gaps, aren't you, Dave, between the clubs, which means you're going to have huge distance issues.
So 4 to pitching wedge plus a sand wedge, if you keep the sand wedge at a traditional loft,
say 55,
54, 55,
yeah,
and your pitching wedge is 42 and a half, then you're going to end up with a massive distance gap. So the gap wedge is there to plug the distance gap between a wedge, which traditionally you don't necessarily always hit a full shot with, to a pitching wedge, which is now really strong and really powerful and goes a long way. So then, for most people, you'll end up leaving yourself at that distance. As I said, if you think about it as the new pitching wedge, so if you've got an old set of clubs where you'd hit your pitching wedge, you hit your gap wedge.
Yeah, I think that's an easy way to remember it. So in hot metal, Dave, they go 4 to pitch and then they go gap wedge, sand wedge, lob wedge within the brand, within the set.
Yes.
Are you recommended to stay with that?
Yeah, I think there's been a lot of thought and there's been a lot of process gone into how to set the loft profile. So it goes 48, 54, 60. Now another way of doing it, you could go 48, 53, 58 if you wanted to keep the gaps at 5 degrees rather than 6 degrees. So there's been thought and there's been methodology put into how to put that set together.
And then and similarly in the hot metal HL, they do that pitching wedge, you know, gap wedge, sand wedge.
Yeah.
So obviously what they've done is that they've identified that there is those issues with loft based on the distances, and they've plugged clubs in. So bottom line here is, folks, if you're going to go for the hot metal HL, stick with the wedges in the set. And it will help you plug those yardages perfectly. You won't suddenly have this massive gap. If you're going to keep a wedge from maybe 3 or 4 years ago that you quite like, you may find that doesn't actually fit into the set. So be careful. Let's transition then into, I guess, those short irons, the gaps.
Yeah.
You made a great comment about it, that you've seen the 4 degree gaps that used to be there.
Yeah.
That's gone.
That's gone, yeah. But I mean, traditionally, you would have had constant gaps running through the set. But in a lot of modern day, and me being a bit of a dinosaur, I have to start thinking about this differently, because the loft profiles at the stronger end is now 3 degrees of gaps, and when you get to the top end, it's 6 degrees of gaps, 5, 6 degrees of gaps. So loft, rather than being consistent, is now variable per club. So you don't have to follow that preconceived, well, I have to go 4 degrees of gaps. Because in these modern day clubs, if you go 4 degrees of gaps, say if you take Hot Metal Pro with a pitching wedge at 42 and a half, then you need pitching wedge, gap wedge, sand wedge, lob wedge. Then end up with a 5-6 wedge system, of which is that a bit of overkill in the grand scheme of things. Yes, you can start to reduce the number of woods at the top end to put more scoring clubs in, but that's only really applicable if you've got speed and power. And these modern day golf clubs that help somebody who could already hit at 260, hit at 280, then they're going to need more wedges at that bottom end. So that's applicable there. But if you take somebody with very little speed, whether it doesn't matter who they are, if there's no speed going in, there's no go out of it.
Yeah.
So then you need something to help, at which point then they're going to need more wood. So then how do they set up a set of wedges to cover off the distance gaps that they're going to leave themselves?
it sounds a bit complicated. And maybe it is a little bit because these loft changes are really making Dave, and you heard him talk about it, having to think differently about how he's sort of presenting these sets to people. But one of the things that David does really well is he will customize the lofts in the set to suit the different style of golfer or different type of golfer. So we won't just plug in exact standard lofts into sets. Dave will actually customize the lofts. I guess what we're trying to get across to you guys is just to be careful. If you are plugging in the standard loft settings, it's very different than it has been before. And you're going to have to think about differently about how you're setting that setup to suit the way that you want to play. This is not a plug and play scenario, and it's very different than before. So you're going to have to think a little bit differently about it, and we're challenging everybody to do that because of what we see in the fittings. We talked about this new gap wedge.
Yeah.
So this is a new club that we talked about earlier on, that people come to the counter to me and they go, what's this GW or AW? It's a very different type of a club. People are going to have to get them.
Of course.
I don't think you're going to get this set without getting one, are you?
No, and the easiest way to think about it is you got to lose one iron off the top end. So the smaller numbers, the 3 irons, the 4 irons, because a 5 iron goes the distance of a 4, and a 9 iron goes a pitching wedge goes the distance of a 9 iron. What's going to do the distance of the pitching wedge?
You have to think about the space in the bag. You know, don't just buy the irons and do exactly what we say and buy, 5 through the sandwich, and ready to get home you've got 15 clubs. So you have to be careful about what you're putting in, aren't you?
I guess that's from a fitter's perspective, that's the point of me being here, is all the technologies are good. So now it's more, well, based on your game, we need to do this, and this to cover off gap A, B, C, D, and E. And it's helping put together the 14 club limit into something which is usable and user-friendly and constructive for your game.
Yeah, Dave sends out these screencasts from TrackMan at the end of each session, just to kind of try and pull together all the explanations. And I hear your screencast getting slightly longer and longer when you're trying to explain the reasons behind all these not massive changes, but certainly what you wouldn't have done traditionally. So it's funny. So we have these little sit-downs, and when we're testing the product first and we're getting our feedback for fittings, that I always say to Dave, we hit the shots, we test it out on TrackMan, we see what's going on, and then I say to Dave, right, what sort of shafts do you think are going to work with this? And I said to Dave, okay, what shafts, Dave? And your answer was?
I have no idea. Everything and everything.
Everything. So for the first time, Dave didn't have specific shaft that would work with specific heads, and that's usually what we would see. If for instance, the Pro would have a heavier shaft with maybe a higher flex profile to keep the ball flight a little bit lower, more controlled. But this is the first time where you said to me, I'm literally using every shaft in all the heads. Let's explain that to the people about what that means to you. Why would you give a comment like that? So
traditionally, if you take the high launch, the player has less speed. So you go for a lighter shaft, you make it a bit softer, you give it a bit more kick. Where in the Pro, there tends to be a little bit more natural speed. So then you can have something a little bit more shaft orientated for control.
Yeah, so that'd be just to split those up. So in the high launch, you'd be using, give us an example.
Like graphite, lightweight nip-ons, 95 grams.
Perfectly. And in the Pro, then you'd be talking about
105s, nip-ons, maybe up to 120 KDSC tape, that sort of.
Okay, so they're the two heads, two shafts. But now,
because everything is so strong in loft, I now have to start using the shaft. Not necessarily as the control system, which I would have done in the past, which I'm always an advocate, and sometimes I'm bad at, of always trying to make it as stable as I can or as stiff as I can to help keep the head under control at the point of impact. But in these high MOI heads, or moment of inertia, which is off centre hit straight, so more forgiving heads, for a layman's term, the head's now the stability. So now I can start using the shaft again in a different way, back like how we used to, softer, bit more kick, go back to a bit more regular shafts, because we've got so much strength in the lofts that we need help producing maybe a little bit more spin to hold the ball in the air. Yes, they launch well, but they don't necessarily spin as well as they used to. So then we can use softness in the shaft to create spin. Even like in Hot Metal Pro, if you still want the thing to launch and still have a good descent angle, a good stopping point, you're still going to have to soften the shaft and make it lighter, rather than making that, well, we'll just go heavy and stiff because that's what we've always done.
So what you're saying is, like, even in the HL, you could be using firmer flexes to try and control it better.
Yeah.
Would you still use graphite and soft? And I guess you would if the speed is low.
If the speed is low, yeah, but there's no reason why you couldn't use something heavier and stiff in it if your problem was getting the ball in the air.
Really interesting. And then in HM Pro, are you seeing then golfers then going for a slightly softer profile? So maybe coming away from Tour Issue and going into a 105 mode?
Yeah, I think a little bit less weight rather than, so that person still wants to feel the shaft quite stable. So maybe a little bit of more lightness to create a little bit more kick as opposed to necessarily softening it off and keeping it heavy, which would have been the traditional profile.
So there you go, folks. David has given us the golden nuggets of this review of the JPX 923, where it's all about the shaft and more about then picking the head that you kind of like the shape of or that suits the kind of profile of flight. But the shaft has become probably one of the most important parts in this whole equation of putting this set together. So just don't go for your normal, what you think, well, I'm always played nip-on 950 regular, I'm just going to put them straight into that head. It's not quite as simple as that. And this leads on from the fact that the lofts are now very different and the clubs are flighting the ball way differently than before with much higher launch and a lower spin side. Best thing I think is to get fitted, but also they use this shaft optimizer, you'll see it around, to help kind of give you a guide on the shaft. So that's probably one to look at. We have a really broad range of shaft options here, so we tend to use TrackMan 4 to identify those kind of flights, so we don't necessarily use the shaft optimizer as much, but maybe get a look at that if you're out there and you're trying to find the best shaft to suit with this head. Obviously get fitted, it's the way forward with the Mizuno for sure, and especially with this head. If you like what we're doing, please give us a comment down below. Let us know that you're finding the information good and you're able to make sense of it, and we'll keep making videos like this. Thanks for watching and see you at the next one.